Welcome, everyone, to the OnPoli podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, the Keffiyeh ban is relaxed somewhat at Queen's Park, but not enough for the NDP member from Toronto St. Paul's.
Your local university is an independent post-secondary institution that can run its own affairs, right? Maybe not, thanks to a new government bill.
There's a town in this province where voters will hold an unexpected election after the Ford government fired the mayor and the entire council. And it's all legal. We'll dig into why.
And in your column, my column, well, I'll focus on the City of Toronto's e-scooter ban.
And I'll shine a light on an increasing lack of civility in our public spaces, which irritated a 73-year-old friend of mine so much he got 2 black eyes for his trouble.
It's Friday, May 10th, 2024, so let's get to it.
Okay, first things first. You get a 0 out of 10 for originality on your shirt today.
I grabbed what was at the top of the laundry basket.
I'm sorry, my friend. You got to do a little better than that. I, on the other hand, took the trouble to wear, well, let's admit it here, this is a little product placement. We're doing a new venture here at TVO called Ontario Chronicle. And I guess you can see it here. It's with, kind of New York Times, Montreal Gazette, Hamilton Spectator font.
Yes.
What do you call that kind of font?
Times New Roman?
Is that what it is? Okay.
No.
Anyway, this is a kind of an online history project. My pals Eric Bombacino and Sean Foreman are working on this with me, and we are sort of doing these 5-6 minute forgotten moments from Ontario political history segments. You and I say this all the time, but I happen to believe it's true. You can't understand where you are or where you're going unless you understand where you've been. So learning more about our past actually helps us understand the present and the future a lot better. And stick around to the very end of the podcast or the broadcast tonight, because we're going to show you a little sneak peek of this week's Ontario Chronicle right after the credits. So don't bail on the credits. Stick around to the very end. And with that, apologies for the bad throat, and on to issue 1. Tensions around whether the keffiyeh is appropriate attire at the Ontario legislature flared up again this week. New Democrat MPP Jill Andrew from Toronto St. Paul's riding was ejected from the House chamber on Wednesday by the Speaker, Ted Arnott, for donning a keffiyeh. Andrew was asked to remove it. She refused. The Speaker warned her. She still refused. Then he named her. And that is the technical term for ejection. Speaker Arnott named MPP Andrew, and the Sergeant-at-Arms walked over to her. He just looked at her, he didn't touch her, and then escorted her out of the chamber. Fellow New Democrat MPP Kristen Wong-Tam from Toronto Centre also left in solidarity with Jill Andrew. Now, notably, MPP Andrew was also wearing a gift from a Jewish constituent. She brought in a tallis, and that is the scarf-like piece of clothing that Orthodox and conservative Jews wear in synagogue. It is really not a cultural piece of attire in Judaism. It is just a religious piece, and it is certainly not a political piece of clothing. And by that I mean you would not see Jewish protesters, for example, wearing their tallises at their demonstrations. Anyway, JMM, pick up the story now, because the Speaker did compromise this past week. What did he do?
Right. He had modified his previous decision, which had previously held that people could not bring a keffiyeh or wear a keffiyeh at all into the entire building of the legislature. That's really how this all started, that NDP staffers and private citizens were being told to remove their keffiyeh. Speaker of the House, Ted Arnott, has acknowledged that MPP offices, staff spaces, other places within the building of the legislature have always had different rules from the chamber itself. So now people will be allowed to wear the keffiyeh into what's called the legislative precinct, which is basically all of the buildings of the legislature except for the chamber itself.
And it seems like, at least the way I read it, and you tell me what you think, Tories, New Democrats, Liberals, Greens are all represented in the legislature, but it looks like the NDP in particular has made this a very strong issue for them.
Yes, I think that's a fair thing to say. The NDP have really continued to criticize both Arnott's decision and what they see as the government complicity with it. They sent out a series of releases over the last week. But on Sunday, they sent out a release where they really outlined the ways that the NDP have challenged Arnott's Keffiyeh policy, how, as I mentioned, NDP staff were among the first to highlight the policy. NDP leader Marit Stiles was the first to challenge it in a letter to Ted Arnott. the party is definitely, I would say, has led in bringing the issue to prominence and in continuing to put pressure on Arnott. They have called repeatedly for votes in the legislature to try and reverse the ban. And they are now threatening a new tactic, or maybe threatening is not the correct word, but they are saying that they will bring an opposition day motion that was announced earlier this week in an email from the party. They say, unlike unanimous consent motions, an opposition day motion, which the NDP gets a limited number of, only needs a simple majority of members voting in favor. The next opportunity for this vote is May 13. With the support of NDP, Liberal, and Green MPPs and just 22 Conservative votes, the NDP motion could pass. Now, I want to stress that details matter here. Opposition day motions are a regular part of business at the legislature, but as I think I've said repeatedly on this podcast, at Queen's Park, opposition parties are very weak. They are weaker than opposition parties are in the House of Commons federally, for example. Just the rules of the legislature are very much slanted against them.
And particularly when it's a majority government, I would think.
Absolutely. So one of the ways that these rules are slanted against the opposition is that opposition day motions are not binding. They are opinion of the House motions, if you want to put it that way. So strictly speaking, even if this motion passes, which is not guaranteed, it's not guaranteed that 22 Tory MPPs will vote for the opposition day motion. Even if it does pass, that does not in and of itself change the Speaker's ruling.
Because he decides at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Presumably.
Yeah. Now, there are also what are called substantive motions where the government could bring a motion forward, which actually would be binding on the Speaker's decision. They have not done so. It is possible, I guess, that if this motion passes with a substantial majority of MPPs saying that they would like the Speaker to reverse his decision, it is possible that Ted Arnott could choose to modify his policy, as he already has this week.
Yes.
But we're at the moment, we're still sort of pinning a lot of hope on what is functionally a non-binding vote.
Well, and not only that, you have to bring politics into this as well, because it may well be that there are a bunch of people on the Tory backbenches who would want to support the opposition day motion, but won't. And why? Because it's put forward by the opposition. And that's reason enough not to support it, even though they may in their hearts agree with the substance of the motion. So all that's part of the mix as well.
Oh, and I mean, just to throw this also in the current environment, there are people, I'm certain there are people in the Tory benches who would support the spirit of the motion, but either don't feel like the party leadership would allow them to, or don't believe it would be a productive thing to do at Queen's Park right now. So,
all of which is to say, this story ain't going away.
No, I'm sure we'll
keep
return
an eye
to this.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, on to issue 2. Now, here's a story that a listener named, and this is his handle on X, at Krista Ferris. And he flagged this issue for us, and we are nothing if not eager to serve our viewers and listeners, so here we go. Colleges and Universities Minister Jill Dunlop has a bill currently making its way through the legislature that would impose some major changes on the province's universities. The government is calling it much-needed oversight. Others fear it is an overreach. JMM, what's going on?
So this is Bill 166, the Strengthening Accountability and Student Supports Act. This legislation was introduced at the same time that the government announced financial supports for universities and colleges in the wake of changes to foreign student rules. We've talked about the financial impact that is having on the post-secondary sector. This legislation is part of the package that was announced. The minister has said that the intent of the bill is to add supports for student mental health and anti-racism programming and improve financial oversight. Basically, the law would require universities to have clear anti-racism and mental health policies, as well as to clearly communicate the costs of attending the institution in question.
That sounds fairly straight ahead on the face of it.
Well, I did leave out one important detail. The law doesn't just require universities to have those policies in place. It gives the minister the power to make directives to universities and to force universities to comply with those directives if the government believes that they are not.
Well, that's a horse of a different color, as someone once said. That is a bigger deal because universities, of course, have operated in this province since before Canada existed. And they've always thought of themselves as self-governing institutions, so this may chip away at that, right?
Right. So, I mean, universities are established by provincial law, or in fact, I mean, laws that are older than the province in some cases, but they've always had that self-governing side to them. And this is part of important law in Canada. Like the Supreme Court ruled in 1990 that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms does not apply to university collective bargaining and employment rules because universities had so much independence from government. They were so functionally separate from government, and the Charter only applies to government action. So the independence of universities is not just a trivial matter.
Indeed. Now, here is a joint statement from a group called the Ontario University and Colleges Coalition. This is a group that represents unionized employees on campus. Bill 166 is being touted as a potential law to improve transparency and student mental health and to combat racism and hate on the province's post-secondary campuses. However, it was clearly thrown together quickly, and there was no consultation with students, faculty, or staff. They then add, we agree with Premier Ford's comments that the government should not be involved in governing universities and colleges. Unfortunately, the government later backtracked with a statement noting the Premier fully supports the bill. Okay, this is getting confusing now. So what's all this an allusion to?
This was a bit of a funny moment. A few weeks ago, the Premier was asked about this bill and the concern raised by, among others, these unions, that it would let the minister micromanage universities. And the Premier seemed to say in this press conference that he didn't think the government should be in the business of telling universities how to run their business, which, of course, raised a few eyebrows among reporters.
Because that's what this bill is doing.
Exactly. Later that day, the Premier's office did confirm that, in fact, the Premier continues to support his own government's legislation.
Okay, so he's anyway. Okay, I'm trying to follow the bouncing ball. What's the status of Bill 166 right now?
So it has passed a second reading and its committee stage. It has already been voted on once by the legislature. It's been through the committee process. It was very lightly amended in the committee. It is now back before the House for third reading. We never presume the outcome of legislative debates, but with the government's majority, it is, I think, very likely that this law will be passed by the legislature before they rise for the summer break in a few weeks.
In which case, we're going to have to keep an eye on this one as well, because I got a feeling this story isn't over yet either.
Indeed. I think we are going to see how this plays out over the next few years even.
Right on. And with that, on to issue 3. The town of Black River-Matheson. You ever heard of it? Confess I had not. It's a bit east of Timmins in northern Ontario. It's got a population of just over 2,500 people. And guess what? They do not have a mayor. They do not have a single town councillor anymore. And that is because last month, Municipal Affairs Minister Paul Calandra dissolved the township's council. And believe it or not, that is perfectly legal. How come?
So there is a section of the Municipal Act, Section 266(1), for anyone playing along at home, that gives the minister the power to dissolve the council of any of Ontario's 444 municipalities if that council goes more than 60 days without being able to hold a meeting because of a failure to obtain quorum.
Quorum. Now, this is one of those fancy Latin words, which basically means you got to have a certain number of people present, and if you don't, then they can't meet.
Yeah, exactly. So at Queen's Park, you have to have 12 MPPs present to conduct any business. In the Federal House of Commons, it is 20 MPs. There are just rules like this for pretty much any assembly you could name.
Okay. And in Black River-Matheson, I gather they haven't had a quorum. How come?
The short version is that they have not had a legal meeting in the Township Council since January. It has been a tumultuous few years in Black River-Matheson since the last election. And I want to say here that I'm relying here mostly on CBC's reporting, so credit to them. But the basics are that last year, council passed a 34% property tax increase.
Wow.
The mayor, Doug Bender, blamed the previous council for saddling the current one with some unpalatable financial choices. Residents are predictably furious about the tax increase. And on top of that, there has been a lengthy labor dispute with local civic workers. So a lot of drama at the township. And starting earlier this year, 3 councillors announced that they would stop attending any meetings whatsoever, specifically to engage this kind of obscure section of the Municipal Act.
Indeed. Now, that obscure section, did you know that or did you have to look that up?
I did actually know about it.
Oh, my goodness. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I mean, we could get into why if we want, but basically it came up as a potential tactic during the Rob Ford years at
okay.
Toronto City Council.
Okay.
That's how I first learned about
And
its
you were
existence.
a Toronto City Hall reporter back then, so
Yes, back
knew
in the
that.
day before I came to Queen's Park, I was at Toronto City Council.
Your sartorial choices are lacking, but your knowledge of the most arcane Ontario legislative sections of laws is really deeply impressive. So good for you.
Well, thank you.
Anyway, so you've set this up for us. End of April, I guess, end of last month, Paul Calandra feels he has a responsibility to step in, and he fires the mayor, he fires the council, and he's told them, what, hold a new election, I guess, eh?
Exactly. There will now be an election in Black River-Matheson on August 12th. That will be election day, and it will be for all 7 positions on council. So I pitched this story in our pitch meeting this week for a few reasons. One, it is super nerdy, and I am super nerdy, and so I just enjoy it on those grounds. But I think it also it puts a spotlight on the relationship between municipalities and the province. There's a cliche that we use a lot in this business that municipalities are creatures of the province, and this is what that looks like. It is actually the job of the provincial government of Queen's Park, of the legislature, to ensure that cities, towns, townships are running well. And that's why this kind of a section of provincial legislation, why that section of the Municipal Act exists.
Now, this is actually not a shockingly new thing. You know, we have seen not only this government, but previous ones, I guess, like move in and take over a school board or move in and take over a hospital if they think that there's malfeasance or, you know, inappropriate operations happening. So the fact they've done it to a municipality feels a bit different, but the principle is the same.
Yeah, absolutely. All of these, and frankly, we were just talking about universities, right? These are all bodies that are created by provincial legislation, and insofar as the government is acting within the bounds of provincial law, which is clearly the case here, this is just part of what the administration of the province can look like. Now, there is one other thing that I want to mention in this case.
You're like Columbo here. You're like Lieutenant Columbo here. Oh, there's one more thing. One more thing I forgot to mention.
We tend to harp on about election turnout here on the podcast. Do you want to guess what the turnout was in Black River-Matheson's 2022 council election?
I'm guessing it was probably embarrassingly low.
Embarrassing, though, I would argue maybe not embarrassing for the usual suspects. It was 6%.
6% turnout?
6% of voters in the township voted in the last election. But I do want to be clear about something. This is one of those times where I don't think we should blame the voters. There was only one contested race on the township council. The mayor and 5 of 6 councillors were acclaimed with no opposition. So in that context, I don't think dismal turnout is terribly surprising.
But okay, you said August 12th is going to be election day?
Yes.
Okay, so they think turnout is going to be dramatically better in the thick of the summer when everybody, you know, in that township may very well be off at their cottages or somewhere else, or maybe just isn't interested. I don't know.
I think maybe given the peculiar circumstances of this election, hopefully they will do better than 6% turnout. I mean, if it were above 30%, that would actually be within the normal range for municipal elections.
And we'll celebrate that.
Yes.
Okay. Anything else on this?
Well, I would just say that we are... we don't get to hope for partisan outcomes or those kinds of election results, but we do get to hope for higher turnout and maybe a more sincere contest of ideas in elections.
Amen to that. And with that, on to the stuff we wrote. Time now for our regular feature. It's called Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I reminisce about the columns we wrote for TVO.org this past week. And what are you going to tee up for us today?
So I wrote a column for the website basically taking Toronto City Council to task for nominally prohibiting e-scooters in the city limits. I think it's kind of a silly prohibition, since if you have been, outdoors at all recently, you have absolutely seen these scooters all over the place.
They're everywhere. Yes, they are.
And the prohibition is just not doing anything. There's a substantial history of the city prohibiting things in name only and having some really perverse effects. And I would love for the city to stop doing that.
Now, not everybody agreed with your take on this matter. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that's very fair to say. David Lepofsky will be familiar to Agenda viewers, a longtime advocate for people with disabilities in Ontario. And he was less than pleased with my column. Now, he did say some very nice things about the podcast and even about some of my previous writing, but he added, I was therefore shocked at your recent TVO online column excoriating Toronto City staff for recommending that Toronto not lift the ban on riding electric scooters in public. City staff were correctly concerned about the amply proven danger that e-scooters pose for vulnerable people with disabilities, seniors, and others. They are a silent menace, endangering public safety in places that allow them. Blind people like me don't know when silent e-scooters rocket at them at over 20 kph, driven by unlicensed, untrained, uninsured, unhelmeted, fun-seeking joyriders. We disability advocates have been in the lead in opposing them. We've had tons of support from the public. We only wish the ban was effectively enforced. Please take a second look at this issue and revisit your column.
Okay, David Lepofsky. David's got the Order of Canada. David's got, I think, the Order of Ontario as well. He's been fighting for the rights of disabled people for decades and decades. Yeah. And he thinks you're wrong. So I'm not taking sides here, but do you want a chance to come back at him?
I mean, I don't like being on the other side of an issue with David, but he's certainly correct that in my column, I didn't actually mention explicitly the concerns of disability advocates, and I think that's a totally fair criticism. I will own that. I will simply say that even in digital writing, we never have enough space to hit all of the points that we would like to. In this case, I didn't explicitly include his concerns, but that isn't because I'm ignorant of those concerns. I want to be very clear about that. I just don't think that Toronto's current policy is serving anybody's concerns, including those of people with disabilities. Now, I mean, clearly, David and I disagree on this issue, but I will absolutely concede that it would at least be more coherent for the city to actually enforce its policy. Now, they aren't doing that, and I'm maybe a bit more jaundiced and cynical. I don't think they are going to. So I think that the prohibition in name only is kind of performative more than anything else. That said, David is absolutely correct that I could have addressed those concerns more clearly in my column.
Can I just ask you, because I actually don't know what the city policy is on this. Are you allowed to ride these e-scooters on a sidewalk, for example?
You're not allowed to ride them at all in the city. There is a provincial pilot program about legalizing e-scooters that this is the whole issue. Toronto has not opted into this pilot program. So within the city of Toronto, technically speaking, those scooters, if you are riding them, I mean, I guess in theory the police could stop you, but they are not a legally allowed vehicle on the road, on the sidewalk, or anywhere else.
Well, because, okay, for what it's worth here, I can understand if you want to drive them on the road. I can even understand if you want to drive them in bike lanes. Because people are zipping through in bike lanes. But on the sidewalks, under no circumstances, I would think. That's dangerous.
Well, so we already have rules about bikes on sidewalks, right? And we've actually discussed this on a previous podcast. And above a certain age, I forget what the cutoff is. I think it might be like the age of 12. It is simply illegal for bikes to be used on the sidewalks. And I think as this provincial pilot matures, it would be a very good idea to add clarity
here.
about where these vehicles are allowed. And there's a whole other discussion about whether these provincial pilots actually have much merit. But I won't belabor this much more than that.
Okay, good enough.
So what about you, Steve?
Okay, I know I'm going to sound like that guy who says, get off my lawn here, but I'm really trying not to sound like that guy. But I did write a column about civility this past week, and I think it's important. I suspect people watching us right now, people listening to us right now, if they look around their communities, I suspect they'll agree with me that they are seeing less civility than they can remember in decades and decades. I'm talking about going onto a subway for the Toronto Transit Commission and seeing a group of young people all talking at the top of their lungs and hurling F-bombs all over the place. I was taught when you're a kid, you don't do that, but apparently they're not being taught that today. I'm talking about lining up to take a train at Union Station at 7 o'clock in the morning, and there's a young guy behind me with his boombox, and he's blasting music. Now, if it was Sinatra, I might let him get away with it, but
it wasn't. Forget it.
It wasn't Sinatra, and I just thought, you got 100 people lined up here, and, we all can't do that, otherwise we've got chaos, but he was doing it. I'm talking about when you hold a door for somebody. They walk right through. They don't say thank you. I'm talking about when you're driving your car on the streets, which I know you don't do because you don't have a car, but some of the rest of us do, and you let somebody cut in and they don't give you a wave. Yeah. These are the little bits of civility which I think add to just the niceness and the grace of a society. And we're losing all of these common courtesies. And I posed the question in my piece about whether or not all of this is happening because either politicians are taking their cues from us or we're taking our cues from them. Certainly their tone these days is ruder and cruder than it ever was when I was a kid. People call each other names that you wouldn't, if we had $5 for every time some politician called somebody else a liar, which you never did, John Michael, when we were kids. That never happened. Now it happens all the time. Now, the pièce de résistance of this story focuses on a guy you and I both know because he used to work here, a producer named Wojtek Schemberg, who is 73 years old. And Wojtek, how do I put it? Wojtek can be a cantankerous guy when he sees things that he really doesn't like. And what he didn't like was being on the St. Clair streetcar a couple of months ago and seeing two guys talking at the top of their lungs and dropping F-bombs, and they were drunk, and he was really not happy about that at all. And so because they were, as we've discussed, misbehaving in a public space, he sort of went over to them and he said, "Shut the front door." Except he didn't say front door. Yeah. It was more like shut the F up. And he probably shouldn't have said that, but Wojtek is 73, and he's been seeing a lot of this incivility in public places, and he just had enough. And they had a bit of a discussion about it on the streetcar, and wouldn't you know it, they all end up getting off at the same spot. They continue the discussion, and before you knew it, Wojtek is on the ground, having been punched in the face, and he has two black eyes to show for his intervention. Two 25-year-olds beating up a 73-year-old because he dared to say to them, "This is not how people are supposed to behave in a public space." So I guess I'd conclude by saying we didn't get here overnight, right? This was bit by bit by bit by bit, we've sort of lost little bits of civility in our public spaces and in our life, and it will take us a little while to get out of this mess as well. And I think if each of us just tries to perform one little civil gesture every day, it would make our world a little more harmonious. And politicians, I urge you to do the same. One little civil gesture in the legislature, in the House of Commons. Maybe don't call somebody a liar today. Maybe we'll all start to follow those Marquess of Queensberry rules, and I think it's a better way to live. Anyway, that's my little 2 cents on this.
Yeah, I mean, people might be asking, this is a politics podcast. Why is Steve going on about manners? And I would say, we used to have this idea that politics wasn't just about the exercise of power. It wasn't just about policy making. The object of good government was to cultivate virtue. And that is a line of thought that you can go all the way back to Plato and the Republic if you want to read about. It was also present in the Enlightenment. And even when, some of Canada's founders were trying to craft, government here. Here at TVO, we actually do believe that it is possible to make people better democratic citizens through the power of education. That is part of our mission.
That's our mission statement.
I would like to think that you and I play our part in that. As you say, not something we can fix overnight. I think for starters, though, I would ask people not to assault septuagenarians.
That would be a good start. If you see a 73-year-old on a streetcar trying to tell you to just keep it down a little bit, maybe don't punch them in the eye when they get off.
Don't assault anybody in general, but septuagenarians in particular.
Right on. Okay, just before we go to the mailbag, I want to do a couple of shout-outs because we do this from time to time. Now that we are on Friday night's edition of The Agenda, televised or on YouTube or however you want to watch it, you don't just listen to this podcast anymore, you can watch it. We have discovered that a whole new generation of particularly younger people are finding us who didn't before when we were just an audio podcast. So I heard a few days ago from a guy, I actually heard from his dad. His dad was telling me, Will Stewart was telling me about James Stewart, not the Academy Award-winning actor, but his son, James Stewart, who is a student at Huron University College in London and is a faithful watcher. So James, keep watching, and there's my shout-out to you. And now this was hilarious. 2 days ago, I'm walking to the corner of McDonald's to get myself some lunch, and some guy walks up to me, started yelling at me, "Hey, Mr. Paikin, Mr. Paikin." So I stop and I say, "Yeah, that's me. Yeah, what's up?" And he says, "Hey, I love that show that you and your buddy are doing on Fridays." He says, "It's the best thing on TV." And I said to him, his name's Bob Patterson. I said, "Bob, it's not the best thing on TV, but we're delighted in the fact that you're watching. So me and my buddy," where are you, over here? Bob Patterson, me and my buddy want to salute you for watching. So there you go. Thanks a lot.
I am still getting used to people recognizing me on the street. it is still a novel experience.
Welcome to television, my friend. There we go.
On that note, let's go to the mailbag.
Indeed. If you've got a burning question or insightful comment, we always love to hear from you at onpolitics@tvo.org. JMM, fire away.
Right. This comes from Alan Goldbach in Toronto. Alan writes, I do not understand why the news media continues to quote polls as if they accurately reflect society. When you compare most election results to the prediction of the polls are usually wrong. I have been a viewer and contributor for at least 20 years. Love the new format. Keep going. Regards.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for contributing to TVO. We are really grateful to your helping us keep the lights on here and chase the mission that we just talked about. But what was his name again?
Alan Goldbach.
Alan, the problem with answering your question lies in the misunderstanding of what polls do, which you have enunciated in your question. Most polls are actually quite good at telling you what people thought yesterday. They cannot predict what people are going to think tomorrow. And the fact that the polls can say one thing at the beginning of an election campaign and say a completely different thing at the end of an election campaign just shows you that campaigns matter. Yeah. People react to things that happen during the course of the campaign, and they change their minds based on that. Polls can't predict. That's not what they do. So don't look to polls to predict the future. Look to them to tell you what people thought in the past. That's my 2 cents.
I absolutely agree with all of that. I would also just add that I think if you think it's bad when reporters obsess about the polls, the daily drumbeat of polls, and honestly, I think some days you and I could both agree with that, it is much, much worse when reporters try to cover politics in the absence of quality polls. Without some kind of audit function, for lack of a better word, reporters and editors and the entire chain of people who produce journalism, they can become prone to any number of biases in their coverage. Can polls be overused or misused? Absolutely, but reporters get into a lot of trouble without them as well. That said, Alan, thank you for the question. And to anyone else in our audience, if you'd like to ask about content on the show, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
Excellent. And that is the On Poly podcast for this May 10th, 2024. Stick around for the credits. Some of you may bail before the credits come. Don't do it this time because we've got something new and special to play at the end, and it relates to this T-shirt here. So there you go.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. So write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Send us your first and last name and where you're from.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Tiffany Lamb. Video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Ariana Longley, Jonathan Hallowell, Christine Gardner, Carla Lucetta, and Vito Tagarelli.
Our managing editor is Katie O'Connor. Lori Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
Special thanks to the studio crew for making the podcast on video look so darn good. Thank you, guys. We also want to leave you now with a clip from Ontario Chronicle. That's our newest series from TVO Today, which just dropped an episode on Alvin Curling. Alvin was Ontario's first black cabinet minister back in 1985, who once conducted an epic, historic filibuster against the Mike Harris government in the 1990s.
Shout out to On-Cron producers Eric Bombacino and Sean Foreman. The episode is available now on YouTube. Check it out there.
Meantime, here comes your clip from Ontario Chronicle, and until next week, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Okay, let's fast forward for a little bit here. 1990, the Liberals lose the election, the NDP comes in, they're in power for 5 years, then they lose the 1995 election. And we usher in a common sense revolution in the province of Ontario. It's Mike Harris and the Progressive Conservatives who are now in power.
Help make Ontario great again. Join the common sense revolution.
And Mike Harris decides fairly early on in his tenure that he's going to introduce something called an omnibus bill. Basically, it's a bill into which governments throw everything, including the kitchen sink. Now, the opposition Liberals were not happy with this approach, and they wanted to stall this omnibus bill from passing. And so that's what they had Alvin Curling do. He got up, and he stood in his place, and he started to speak against the bill. This filibuster continued for 18 straight hours. He couldn't stop. Once he stops talking, once he sits down, his filibuster is over, and the government can call a vote and bring in the bill.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.